Hello, I'm Bob Trubshaw. Yes, it's been quite a while since I've uploaded a video, and this one is different to any of my previous ones. I want you to think about the question, what is a museum?
What is a museum?
A museum aims to collect, conserve, study, interpret and exhibit objects of cultural, artistic or scientific significance.
A museum is where we may construct and reconstruct our ideas about the past.
A museum is where we are told how we should think about the past.
What is a museum? A museum may be another name for an art gallery.
A museum may be all about one dead artist.
What is a museum? A museum is where the biggest and best dinosaur bones are displayed.
A museum is where really big steam locomotives can be seen.
A museum is where tanks and aircraft and guns can be seen.
A museum is where the remains of dead animals can be seen.
A museum is where the remains of dead people can be seen.
A museum is where the remains of dead people can be seen, even though the dead person did not give permission.
A museum is where the remains of dead people are objectified.
A museum is rarely a place where the ancient dead are honored.
What is a museum?
A museum is where hundreds of flint arrowheads, all looking almost the same, can be seen.
A museum is where objects too frail to be in the real world go to be stored.
A museum is where objects too expensive to be in the real world go to be stored.
A museum is where objects too rare to be in the real world go to be stored.
A museum is a giant storeroom where usually only about 5% of the objects are on public display.
What is a museum?
A museum is where 19th century paintings of naked women are still considered allegorical and not soft porn.
What is a museum?
A museum is where the people creating the displays tie themselves up in knots about the legacy of slavery.
What is a museum?
A museum is the tasteful and boring offspring of what were once entrancing cabinets of curiosities.
What is a museum?
A museum adds prestige to its town or city.
A museum may have been built to create prestige for a middling sort of town.
A museum may have been built to bring in tourists.
A museum is where tourists go when it is raining.
A museum is where coachloads of noisy schoolchildren arrive every day for school outings.
A museum employs lots of school liaison officers and museum education officers.
A museum used to employ lots of professionally trained curators. What is a museum?
A museum used to be a temple of the muses where people went to be inspired.
What is a museum?
A museum is where you always exit through the gift shop.